So what makes a good hypothesis then? There's some criteria that we should meet, scientists should meet in order to define a good hypothesis. It must have these criteria. So we call it a hypothesis is an educated explanation for an observation or a scientific problem. So it's not the answer, it's not the truth, but it's getting us to our best attempt at reaching a logical true conclusion. So it's an educated guess. A hypothesis is based on observations, inferences, and previous knowledge. This is inductive reasoning. I taught you discovery science. We visited Jane Goodall with her chimpanzees, and she kept notebooks, made observations on their social hierarchy. How did they behave around each other? What were the interactions that they had? She made those observations and collected data. She also took photographs. These are all going to help her form a hypothesis. It just doesn't come out of nowhere. We have to have a basis for forming it. It must be a statement. Lots of students, whenever they try and tell me what a good hypothesis is, they then make it in the form of a question. It is not a question. It must be a statement. Lastly, a hypothesis, a good hypothesis, must be testable. You have to be able to test it. I can make an educated guess on something, but if I'm not able to test it, then that doesn't belong in science. That belongs in another discipline. So it must be testable and it must be falsifiable. What I mean by that is, can the question be answered no? If I can't answer that question with no, then again, it doesn't belong in the scientific method. Science cannot help us answer that question. Okay, so going by that, I actually want you guys to think of the following and whether they are good hypotheses. So only one of them is, the others are not. So which of these are good hypotheses? Let's read the first one. People living in areas exposed to higher UV levels show a higher frequency of skin cancer. Is that a good hypothesis? Thinking of our criteria, is it based on observations, inferences, previous knowledge? Is it a statement? Is it testable and falsifiable? So a lot of students think that that's a hypothesis, and it's kind of tricky. This is actually an observation. You're giving me data that people living in areas exposed to UV light show a higher frequency of skin cancer. You're using data to make that correlation. That's called an observation. You're not truly making a connection between the variables there just yet. You're starting there, you're using inductive reasoning to get there, but you're not there just yet. That is an observation. Okay, next one. Will ultraviolet light cause skin cancer? Is that a good hypothesis? This is actually a question. A hypothesis must be in the form of a statement. So remember, we use inductive reasoning, observations and questions to help us form a hypothesis. Last one, ultraviolet light causes skin cancer. That is definitely a good hypothesis. You're making a connection between different variables. That's UV light and skin cancer. You're saying that there's a correlation there. You're using your observation and your question in order to form that hypothesis. It is a statement. You can test that, you can absolutely test that, and you can prove that false. You can answer that no ultimately while running your experiment.